The girl was just a poor waitress. But when she saw the millionaire about to drink, she screamed in front of everyone. No one understood. Seconds later, the truth came out. And that moment changed both of their lives forever. The early morning fog rolled off Lake Michigan like a gray blanket, wrapping around the towering glass buildings of downtown Chicago. Grace Sullivan pulled her worn jacket tighter as she hurried down the sidewalk, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. At 28, she had the kind of beauty that didn't announce itself. Soft brown eyes that seemed to hold secrets, auburn hair that caught the light just right, and hands that told the story of someone who'd worked hard for everything she had. The Crystal Palace stood like a jewel among the upscale restaurants on North Michigan Avenue. Its floor-to-ceiling windows gleamed in the morning light, and the gold lettering on the door promised an experience that most people could only dream of affording. Grace had been walking through that door for 3 years now, but she still felt like an outsider looking in. "Morning, Grace," called out Marcus, the head chef, as she slipped through the employee entrance. "How's your mom doing?" "Good days and bad days," Grace replied with a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same answer she'd been giving for months now, ever since Diane's condition had started getting worse. The kitchen was already buzzing with activity. Line cooks prepped vegetables with machine-like precision, and the morning shift servers were setting up their stations. Grace tied her apron around her waist and checked her reflection in the stainless steel surface of a prep table. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights she'd been having, sitting beside her mother's bed, watching her struggle with a disease that seemed to steal a little more of her each day. "You're working a double again today?" asked Sarah, one of the other servers, as she arranged silverware on a tray. "Need the money," Grace said simply. She didn't mention that her mother's medical bills were piling up faster than she could pay them, or that she'd been taking on extra shifts for weeks now, trying to stay ahead of the crushing weight of debt. The morning shift at Crystal Palace was usually quiet, mostly business lunches and the occasional wealthy socialite meeting friends for brunch. But Grace preferred it that way. The evening crowd was different. They were the ones with real money, the kind of people who could drop more on a bottle of wine than she made in a week. They were also the ones who looked right through her, as if she were invisible. Around noon, Grace took her break and called home from the alley behind the restaurant. The phone rang 3 times before a weak voice answered. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom. How are you feeling today?" Diane Sullivan, though that wasn't really her name, had been beautiful once. Grace could see it in the old photographs scattered around their small apartment, but the disease had changed her, stealing her strength and leaving behind a frail woman who seemed to fade a little more each day. "I'm okay, honey. Don't worry about me. How's work?" Grace could hear the effort it took for her mother to sound normal, to pretend that everything was fine. They'd both become experts at pretending. "It's fine, Mom. Listen, I won't be home until late tonight. Mr. Peterson wants me to work the evening shift too." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Grace, you're working too hard. You need to take care of yourself too." "I'm fine," Grace lied, the same way her mother lied when she said she was okay. "Mrs. Chen is checking on you this afternoon, right?" "Yes, she'll be by around 3, Grace." "Yeah. I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, Mom." Grace ended the call and leaned against the brick wall, closing her eyes for a moment. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if things had been different. If her father hadn't died when she was 13, if her mother hadn't gotten sick, if they'd had family to help them, or money, or just plain luck. But wondering didn't pay the bills, and it certainly didn't make her mother better. The afternoon passed in a blur of orders and refills, polite smiles and aching feet. Grace had perfected the art of being present but invisible, efficient but forgettable. It was safer that way. The less attention she drew to herself, the better. As evening approached, Crystal Palace transformed. The lighting dimmed to a warm golden glow. Fresh flowers appeared on every table. The servers changed into their evening uniforms, black dresses that were elegant but practical, designed to help them blend into the background while serving Chicago's elite. Grace was adjusting her name tag when she overheard 2 of the hostesses talking near the entrance. "Did you see the reservation list for tonight?" whispered Jenny, a blonde who'd been working there for 6 months. "Jason Whitman's coming in. You know, the Whitman heir, the one who's engaged to that politician's daughter," asked Lisa, checking her lipstick in a compact mirror. "Brittany Hall," Yeah, they're celebrating their engagement tonight. Word is he's worth like hundreds of millions. Grace felt a strange chill run down her spine at the mention of the name Whitman, though she couldn't quite place why. It was familiar somehow, like a half-remembered dream that lingered at the edges of her consciousness. She pushed the feeling aside and got back to work. Rich people and their celebrations were nothing new at Crystal Palace. She'd served movie stars, politicians, tech billionaires, and oil executives. They all tipped well if you stayed invisible and did your job without making them remember you existed. But as the evening wore on, Grace found herself thinking about that name, Whitman. Why did it feel so important? Why did it make her stomach twist with something that felt almost like recognition? At home in their cramped one-bedroom apartment, Diane Sullivan sat in her worn recliner, staring at a photograph she kept hidden in an old jewelry box. The picture showed a younger version of herself, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. David Sullivan had been a good man, an honest man, and he'd died for it. She tucked the photograph away and reached for her medication, her hands trembling slightly. The pills were supposed to help with the symptoms, but they couldn't cure what was really wrong with her. Nothing could cure the weight of 15 years of lies, of stolen identity, of running from a truth that seemed determined to catch up with her. Diane had spent years praying that Grace would never have to know the real story, that she could live a normal life, fall in love, have children, grow old without ever learning about the darkness that had shaped their existence. But lately, she'd been having dreams. Nightmares, really, about the past coming back to claim them both. She closed her eyes and tried to push away the memories of that terrible night 15 years ago. The night everything changed. The night Caroline Blake died and Diane Sullivan was born, back at Crystal Palace. Grace was wiping down tables when she noticed the evening's special guests had arrived. Jason Whitman was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to worry about money. He was handsome in an understated way, not flashy like some of the other wealthy men who frequented the restaurant. The woman beside him was everything Grace wasn't. Tall, blonde, perfectly dressed in what was probably a designer gown that cost more than Grace made in a year. Brittany Hall looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, all sharp angles and calculated smiles. With them was another man, distinguished-looking with silver hair and an expensive suit. He carried himself like someone used to being in control, someone who expected the world to arrange itself according to his wishes. Grace was assigned to their table. As she approached with menus and water glasses, she felt that strange sensation again, that twist in her stomach, like her body was trying to warn her about something her mind hadn't figured out yet. "Good evening," she said with her practiced smile. "Welcome to Crystal Palace. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Jason Whitman looked up at her, and for just a moment, their eyes met. There was something in his gaze. Kindness. Maybe. Or just basic human decency. It was more than she usually got from the wealthy clientele. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was warmer than she'd expected. "Could we see your wine list?" As Grace handed over the leather-bound wine menu, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was going to be different somehow, that something was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. She had no idea how right she was. The evening crowd at Crystal Palace was in full swing by 8 o'clock. Grace moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and refilling wine glasses while the soft murmur of expensive conversations filled the air. The Whitman party had been seated at table 12, one of the prime spots near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Jason Whitman had ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon to celebrate, and Grace had watched as he raised his glass to toast his engagement to Brittany Hall. There was something about the scene that felt off to her, though she couldn't put her finger on what exactly. Maybe it was the way Brittany's smile never quite reached her eyes, or how the older man with them, Brian Aguirre, she'd learned from the reservation, kept checking his phone with barely concealed anxiety. "Another round of appetizers for table 7, called out Marcus from the kitchen pass. Grace grabbed the plates and headed across the dining room, but her attention kept drifting back to table 12. She'd been serving wealthy people for 3 years now, and she'd developed a sixth sense about their dynamics, the way they held themselves, the subtle power plays, the unspoken tensions that simmered beneath their polite facades. Something was definitely wrong with the Whitman celebration. Around 9:30, Grace noticed Kyle behind the bar. He was new, had only started working at Crystal Palace a week ago, tall and lean with nervous eyes. He'd kept to himself during his short tenure. Most of the staff barely knew his last name. But tonight, something about his behavior was setting off alarm bells in Grace's head. She watched as he prepared a special cocktail, something off-menu that Brian Aguirre had specifically requested for Jason. Kyle's movements were quick and precise, but there was a furtiveness to them that made Grace's stomach clench with unease. That's when she saw it. Kyle reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small glass vial, no bigger than her thumb. The liquid inside was clear, odorless, and he added just a few drops to Jason's drink. It was such a quick motion that anyone else would have missed it. But Grace had spent years watching her mother's medications, learning to recognize the subtle differences between therapeutic doses and dangerous ones. The smell hit her as Kyle passed by with the cocktail, bitter almonds with an underlying chemical tang that made her think of the digitoxin her mother sometimes took for her heart condition. But this concentration was all wrong. This wasn't medicine. This was something else entirely. Grace's heart started pounding. She knew that smell. She'd researched every medication her mother took, every possible interaction, every warning sign. What Kyle had just added to that drink could kill someone. Without thinking, Grace moved quickly toward table 12. Jason was laughing at something Brittany had said, completely unaware of the danger heading his way. Kyle was almost at their table, the poisoned cocktail balanced perfectly on his tray. "Excuse me?" Grace said loudly, stepping directly into Kyle's path. "I think there's been a mistake with..." She deliberately stumbled, throwing herself against Kyle's arm. The cocktail glass flew from the tray, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and liquid. The entire dining room went silent for a moment, all eyes turning toward the commotion. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Grace gasped, dropping to her knees to pick up the larger pieces of glass. "I'm such a klutz. Let me clean this up right away." Kyle's face had gone white. It's fine," he stammered, but Grace could see the panic in his eyes. "I'll just make another..." "No need," Jason said, standing up from his table. "Are you hurt?" He was looking at Grace with genuine concern, not the irritation she'd expected from someone whose evening had just been disrupted. "I'm okay," Grace said, still gathering glass fragments. That's when she saw it, a small vial that had fallen from Kyle's pocket during the collision. She palmed it quickly, slipping it into her apron before anyone else could notice. "Kyle, why don't you take a break?" said Mr. Peterson, the restaurant manager, who had appeared with remarkable speed. "Grace, get this cleaned up, and bring Mr. Whitman a replacement drink on the house, of course." But when Grace looked up, Kyle was gone. She spotted him through the kitchen swing doors, already pulling off his apron and heading for the employee exit. He didn't even stop to collect his things. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Grace finished her shift mechanically, her mind racing with what she'd witnessed. In the employee bathroom, she examined the vial more closely. The liquid inside had the same bitter almond smell, and there were traces of white residue around the cap. Definitely some kind of cardiac medication, but in a concentration that would be lethal. She wrapped the vial carefully in paper towels and tucked it deep into her purse. Then she gathered the largest pieces of the broken glass she'd been able to save, the ones that still had traces of the spilled drink on them. Grace's hands were shaking as she changed out of her uniform. Someone had just tried to murder Jason Whitman right in front of her, and she was the only one who knew it. The question was, what was she supposed to do about it by the time she got home? It was nearly midnight. Their apartment was dark, except for the soft glow of the television in the living room. Diane was asleep in her recliner, a medical drama playing softly in the background. Grace covered her mother with a blanket and sat down at their small kitchen table, staring at the evidence she'd collected. She should call the police. That was the obvious thing to do. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way Kyle had disappeared so quickly, or the fact that Brian Aguirre had been the one to request the special drink. This wasn't some random crime of passion. This was planned, professional, and that made it dangerous. Grace spent the night researching on her laptop, using the free Wi-Fi from the coffee shop downstairs. She looked up everything she could find about digitoxin poisoning, about Jason Whitman, about his engagement to Brittany Hall. The more she read, the more convinced she became that what she'd witnessed was attempted murder. The next morning brought a knock at their door that changed everything. 2 detectives from the Chicago PD stood in the hallway. their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Ms. Sullivan, we'd like to ask you some questions about an incident at Crystal Palace last night." Grace's mouth went dry. "What kind of incident?" "The kind where someone tried to poison Jason Whitman," said Detective Rodriguez, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and graying hair. "And according to the restaurant's security footage, you were the one who prevented it from happening." They sat in Grace's tiny living room while Diane dozed in the next room. Grace told them everything. About Kyle's suspicious behavior, about the vial, about the smell she'd recognized. She handed over the evidence she'd collected, watching as the detectives examined the glass fragments and the small bottle. "You probably saved his life," Detective Rodriguez said, after Grace finished her story. "We ran tests on the residue from that glass. It was digitoxin, enough to cause massive cardiac arrest within minutes." "What about Kyle?" Grace asked. "Kyle Morrison," said Detective Chen, Rodriguez's partner. 26 years old, no criminal record, worked at 3 different restaurants in the past year. "Turns out Kyle Morrison doesn't exist. The whole identity was fabricated. Professional job." Grace felt cold. "So this was planned?" "Oh yeah, and we know who planned it." Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "Brian Aguirre and Brittany Hall. They thought they were smart, but they got sloppy. We found text messages between them. Financial records showing payments to offshore accounts. They were planning to kill Jason and make it look like a heart attack. But why? Money," Detective Chen said simply. "Jason's worth about $400 million. Brittany was set to inherit everything when they got married, especially with the prenup Brian had drawn up. But they got impatient." Grace thought about Jason's kind eyes, the way he'd been genuinely concerned when she fell. "He has no idea, does he?" "Not yet, but he will soon enough. We're making arrests this morning." After the detectives left, Grace sat alone in her kitchen trying to process what had happened. She'd saved a man's life without even meaning to. Someone she'd never met before last night. Someone whose name had given her strange chills for reasons she still couldn't understand. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager. "Grace, need you to come in early today. Jason Whitman specifically requested you as his server. Says he wants to thank you personally." Grace stared at the message, her heart racing. She had a feeling that last night was just the beginning of something much bigger than she could possibly imagine. 15 years earlier, the rain hammered against the windshield as Caroline Blake sat in her unmarked federal vehicle, watching the Sullivan Mining Company building through the darkness. At 32, she was one of the youngest federal investigators ever assigned to a case this big, and the weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders. 3 months of undercover work had led her to this moment, the night she would finally get the evidence needed to bring down one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations the Bureau had ever encountered. She adjusted the wire hidden beneath her jacket and checked her weapon one more time. David Sullivan, her contact inside the company, was supposed to meet her in the parking garage at midnight with the financial records that would expose everything. David was a good man, an honest man who'd discovered that his business partner Henry Whitman was using their legitimate mining operation to wash money for drug cartels and arms dealers. Caroline had been posing as Diana Morris, a freelance accountant hired to audit the company's books. It was the perfect cover, close enough to the financial records to gather evidence, invisible enough that nobody suspected her real identity. David was the only one who knew the truth, and even he didn't know her real name. The clock on her dashboard read 11:47 p.m. when she saw headlights approaching the building, but something was wrong. Instead of David's modest sedan, a black SUV pulled into the parking garage, followed by another vehicle she recognized, Henry Whitman's silver Mercedes. Caroline's blood went cold. This wasn't the meeting they'd planned. She grabbed her radio to call for backup, but the transmission was nothing but static. They were jamming her signal. Her heart started racing as she realized what was happening. David had been compromised. Through her binoculars, she watched in horror as Henry Whitman emerged from his car with 2 other men she didn't recognize. They were dragging someone between them, someone who looked unconscious or worse. Even from a distance, she could see it was David. Caroline knew she should stay hidden, call for backup from a landline, follow protocol, but David had a 13-year-old daughter and a wife who was already sick. He'd risked everything to help the investigation, and now he was going to pay for it with his life. She made a decision that would haunt her for the next 15 years. Caroline started her car and drove into the parking garage, her headlights cutting through the darkness. She had to try to save him, had to do something. But as she rounded the corner, she realized she was too late. Henry Whitman was standing over David's motionless body, a crowbar in his hands. Blood pooled beneath David's head, dark and shiny under the fluorescent lights. Caroline watched in frozen horror as Henry and his associates loaded David's body into the back of the SUV. "Make it look like an accident," Henry was saying to one of his men. "Car goes off the bridge, single vehicle collision. Happens all the time in weather like this." Caroline fumbled for her phone, trying to get photos, evidence, anything that could be used to convict these monsters. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the device steady. That's when Henry Whitman looked up and saw her. Their eyes met across the parking garage, and Caroline knew in that instant that her life as she knew it was over. Henry said something to one of his men, who immediately started walking toward her car. Caroline threw the car in reverse and floored it, tires screeching against the concrete. She had maybe 30 seconds before they reached her. 30 seconds to decide between staying and fighting or running to live another day. She chose to run. The next few hours were a blur of safe houses and emergency protocols. Caroline's handler, Agent Martinez, met her at a bureau facility outside the city. His face was grim as he listened to her report. "We can't protect you," he said finally. "Whitman's got people everywhere. Police, prosecutors, judges. Half the department is probably on his payroll. If you testify, you'll be dead within a week." "What about David's family? His daughter?" "They don't know what he was doing. As far as they're concerned, David Sullivan died in a car accident. It's better that way." Caroline felt sick. "So Whitman just gets away with it. For now, but this isn't over. We'll build another case, find another way. But first, we need to keep you alive." The Witness Protection Program offered her a new identity, a new life somewhere far away. But Caroline couldn't bear the thought of abandoning David's family completely. His wife was dying of cancer, and their daughter would be alone in the world within a year. That's when Caroline made the second decision that would define the rest of her life. She would become Diane Sullivan. It took 6 months of careful planning. Caroline Blake died in a fabricated car accident. Her body never recovered from the river. FBI records were sealed. Witnesses relocated. Meanwhile, Diane Sullivan, David's long-lost sister from California, appeared just in time to help with Grace's mother's final months. Caroline had studied the family history meticulously. She knew about David's estranged sister who'd moved to the West Coast years earlier, who'd been too proud to ask for help when her own life fell apart. It was the perfect cover story, and Grace's mother was too sick to ask many questions. When Grace's mother died 6 months later, 13-year-old Grace was left in the care of her aunt, Diane. Caroline threw herself into the role, becoming the mother that Grace needed while carrying the crushing weight of the truth she could never tell. Present-day Diane Sullivan, who would always be Caroline Blake in her heart, sat in her recliner, watching the evening news coverage of the arrests at Crystal Palace. Jason Whitman's face filled the screen as reporters discussed the shocking betrayal by his fiancée and closest friend. Her hands trembled as she reached for the remote. That face, older now, more mature, but unmistakably Henry Whitman's son. She'd spent 15 years dreading this moment, knowing that someday the past would catch up with them. But as she listened to the news report, something unexpected happened. Instead of the cold arrogance she remembered in his father's eyes, Jason Whitman's face showed only genuine confusion and hurt. He spoke about feeling betrayed, about not understanding how people he trusted could have done something so horrible. "I just want to thank the woman who saved my life," he was saying to the reporter. Grace Sullivan showed incredible courage and quick thinking. "I owe her everything." Diane's heart stopped. Grace Sullivan, her Grace, the daughter she'd raised, the girl who didn't know that the man she'd saved was the son of her father's killer. The irony was almost too much to bear. After 15 years of hiding, of living in fear that the Whitman name would somehow destroy what was left of their family, Grace had saved Henry Whitman's son without even knowing who he was. Diane reached for the hidden photograph of David, running her finger along his face. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the image. "How do I tell her the truth?" But even as she asked the question, she knew she couldn't. Not yet. Grace was just starting to build a life for herself, just beginning to find her place in the world. The truth about her father's murder, about Caroline's hidden identity, about the 15 years of lies they'd built their relationship on. It would destroy her. The front door opened, and Grace walked in. Looking exhausted, but somehow different. There was a light in her eyes that Diane hadn't seen in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond just surviving day to day. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Grace asked, settling onto the couch beside her. "Tired," Diane said, which was true. She was tired of lying. Tired of carrying this secret. Tired of being afraid. "How was work? I saw the news about what happened." Grace's expression grew serious. "It was intense. The police think I saved that man's life. Jason Whitman," Diane said carefully, watching her daughter's face for any sign of recognition. "Yeah, he seems like a good person, different from what I expected. Different from his father," Diane thought but didn't say. "Be careful, Grace. Rich people and their problems can be dangerous." Grace looked at her with concern. "Mom, you seem worried about something. Is everything okay?" For a moment, Diane considered telling her everything. About Caroline Blake and David Sullivan and Henry Whitman. About the night 15 years ago that had shaped every decision since. About the fact that she wasn't really Grace's aunt. That she was a federal investigator who'd given up everything to protect the daughter of a murdered man. But looking at Grace's face, so young, so hopeful despite everything they'd been through, Diane couldn't bring herself to destroy that hope. "Not yet. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just worried about you working too hard." Grace leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Don't worry about me. I can take care of myself." As Grace headed to bed, Diane sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by 15 years of lies and the growing certainty that their carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The past had finally found them, wearing the face of Henry Whitman's son and carried in the hands of the daughter who didn't know she'd just saved the life of her father's killer's heir. And somehow, impossibly, Diane found herself hoping that Jason Whitman really was different from his father, because if he wasn't, if he carried even a trace of Henry's cruelty and greed, then everything she'd sacrificed to protect Grace would have been for nothing. Grace arrived at Crystal Palace the next afternoon to find the restaurant buzzing with an energy she'd never experienced before. Word had spread quickly about the attempted murder, and every staff member seemed to have a theory about what had really happened. The morning news had been full of speculation about the Whitman family and their business empire, with reporters camping outside the restaurant hoping to catch a glimpse of Jason. "Grace," Mr. Peterson appeared at her elbow, looking more flustered than she'd ever seen him. "Mr. Whitman is already here, table 12 again. He specifically asked for you." Grace's stomach tightened. She'd spent the morning trying to prepare herself for this conversation, but she still had no idea what to expect. Would he be angry that she'd gotten involved? Grateful? Suspicious about how she'd known to intervene? She smoothed her apron and walked across the dining room, her heart beating faster with each step. Jason Whitman sat alone at the corner table, looking out the window at the bustling street below. In daylight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders that spoke of a sleepless night. He looked up as she approached, and that same kindness she'd noticed the night before was still there, though now it was mixed with something else. Wariness, maybe, or just the shell-shocked expression of someone whose world had been turned upside down. "Ms. Sullivan," he said, standing as she reached the table. The gesture surprised her. Most wealthy customers barely acknowledged her existence, let alone showed basic courtesy. "Please, just Grace," she said, setting down a water glass. "How are you doing? I heard about what happened after I left last night." Jason's laugh was bitter. "You mean how my fiancé and my best friend tried to have me murdered?" "Yeah, I'm still processing that part." Grace winced. She'd read the morning news, seen the headlines about Brittany Hall and Brian Aguirre's arrest. The details were ugly. A carefully planned assassination designed to look like a heart attack, with Brittany set to inherit Jason's fortune through a will that Brian had secretly altered. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "That must be incredibly difficult." "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it." Jason gestured for her to sit down. "Another surprise. Please, I know you're working, but I need to talk to you about what happened." Grace glanced around the restaurant nervously. "I probably shouldn't. I spoke to your manager. He said it was fine." She sat down carefully, perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. Jason studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "The police told me what you did," he said finally. "How you recognized the poison. How you deliberately spilled that drink. They said you probably saved my life. I recognized the smell. My mother takes heart medication, and I've learned to be careful about drug interactions. When I saw that bartender add something to your drink, it didn't look right. Most people would have minded their own business." Grace shrugged. Most people haven't spent 3 years watching their mother struggle with medication side effects. "I guess I'm more paranoid than most." Something in Jason's expression softened. "Your mother is sick. She has a neurological condition. Degenerative, the doctors say." Grace stopped herself. She never talked about her mother's illness with customers, barely talked about it with friends. But there was something about Jason's genuine concern that made the words come easier. "The doctors say what? That it's getting worse, that eventually—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jason was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly hard to watch. We manage." Grace started to stand up. "I should really get back to work." "Wait." Jason's voice was urgent. "I have a proposition for you." Grace raised an eyebrow. "What kind of proposition?" "I need a security consultant. Someone with good instincts. Someone who can spot things that other people miss. The police investigation showed me just how vulnerable I've been. How many people around me I can't trust. Mr. Whitman, I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about security. You spotted a professional assassin when nobody else did. You recognized poison by smell alone. And most importantly," Jason leaned forward, "you're the only person in my life right now who doesn't want something from me." Grace felt a flush of heat in her cheeks. "I couldn't possibly. The job pays $200,000 a year." The number hit Grace like a physical blow. $200,000 was more money than she'd made in the past 5 years combined. It was enough to pay for her mother's treatment, enough to get them out of their cramped apartment, enough to stop worrying about bills for the first time in her adult life. That's too much money," she said weakly. "Not for someone who saved my life. Not for someone I can trust." Grace's mind was racing. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was crazy, that she had no qualifications for this kind of work. But the practical part, the part that had been counting every penny for years, was already calculating how much medication that salary could buy, how many months of rent it would cover. What would I actually do? Be my eyes and ears, come with me to meetings, social events, business dinners, help me figure out who I can trust and who might be planning to stab me in the back. Literally, in some cases. "I don't know anything about your world. That's exactly why I need you. Everyone else in my circle has agendas, connections, reasons to lie to me. You see things clearly because you're not part of the game." Grace thought about her mother sitting alone in their apartment, about the stack of medical bills on their kitchen table, about the way Diane tried to hide her pain when she thought Grace wasn't looking. "I'd need to be able to work flexible hours. My mother needs someone with her, especially in the evenings. Of course, we can arrange for a private nurse if that would help." The offer was so generous it made Grace suspicious. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Jason was quiet for a moment, staring out the window. "Because yesterday I thought I knew everyone in my life. I thought Brian was my best friend. We've known each other since college. I thought Brittany loved me. I thought I was a good judge of character." He turned back to Grace, and she could see the hurt in his eyes. "But you, a complete stranger, cared enough about my life to risk your job, maybe even your safety, to save me. That tells me more about your character than 3 years of knowing someone who was planning to murder me." Grace felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for this man who had everything and yet seemed so alone. "It must be hard not knowing who to trust." "It is. So what do you say? Will you help me?" Grace thought about all the reasons to say no. She had no experience, no training, no business inserting herself into the dangerous world of wealth and power. But she also thought about her mother's medical bills, about the possibility of getting Diane the best care available, about having enough money to stop choosing between groceries and prescription medications. "I'd want to start part-time," she said slowly. "Keep working here a few shifts a week until I know this is really going to work out." Jason smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "That's perfectly reasonable. And I'd want everything in writing, contract, job description, the whole thing. My lawyer can have something drawn up by tomorrow." Grace took a deep breath. "Then yes, I'll do it." Jason extended his hand across the table. "Welcome to the team, Grace Sullivan." As she shook his hand, Grace felt a strange combination of excitement and terror. She was about to enter a world she'd only ever observed from the outside, working for a man whose last name sent inexplicable chills down her spine. But she was also about to make enough money to give her mother the care she needed. And maybe, just maybe, she'd be able to help someone who seemed genuinely decent navigate the treacherous waters of wealth and privilege. She had no idea that in accepting this job, she was taking the first step toward uncovering the truth about her father's death and her mother's hidden past, or that the man whose life she'd saved was the son of the person who had destroyed her family 15 years earlier. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she felt like she might actually be able to make a difference. Grace stared at the contract on her kitchen table, the legal language swimming before her tired eyes. Jason's lawyer had delivered it that morning, along with a signing bonus that was more money than Grace had ever seen in one place. The check sat beside the papers like a promise of everything her life could become. $200,000, she whispered to herself for the 10th time, still unable to believe it was real. Grace. Diane's voice drifted from the living room, weak but concerned. Who was at the door? Grace quickly folded the contract and slipped it into her purse. She wasn't ready to explain this to her mother yet. Wasn't sure how to explain that she'd be working for a Whitman without revealing why that name made her stomach twist with unease. Just a delivery, Grace called back, walking into the living room where Diane was propped up in her recliner, looking smaller and frailer than usual. You look upset about something. Grace sat down on the couch, studying her mother's face. In the past few weeks, Diane had seemed increasingly agitated, as if something was weighing on her mind beyond her illness. She'd started having nightmares again, waking up in cold sweats and calling out names Grace didn't recognize. Mom, I need to tell you something. Diane's entire body tensed. What is it? I got offered a new job, a really good job. It would mean we could afford better medical care for you, maybe move to a nicer apartment. What kind of job? Diane's voice was sharp, more alert than Grace had heard her sound in months. Security consulting for a wealthy client who had some trouble recently. What client? Grace hesitated. Jason Whitman. The color drained from Diane's face so quickly that Grace thought she might faint. Her mother's hands began trembling violently, and she struggled to sit up straighter in her chair. No, Diane whispered. No, Grace, you can't. Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Diane's eyes were wide with something that looked like terror. The Whitman family. They're dangerous, Grace. You don't understand what you're getting involved in. How do you know anything about the Whitman family? Grace knelt beside her mother's chair, alarmed by the intensity of her reaction. Mom, you're scaring me. Diane closed her eyes, and Grace could see her struggling with some internal battle. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her cheeks. There are things about our family history that I've never told you. Things about your father's death. Grace's heart started pounding. What things? Your father didn't die in a random car accident, Grace. He was murdered. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She sank back onto the couch, staring at her mother in shock. What are you talking about? David discovered that his business partner was involved in money laundering, using their mining company to wash money for criminals. When he threatened to go to the authorities, Henry Whitman had him killed. Grace felt the room spinning around her. Henry Whitman, Jason's father. Yes, Diane's voice was barely a whisper. And there's more. I'm not really your aunt. Grace, my name isn't Diane Sullivan. I don't understand. Diane took a shuddering breath. I'm Caroline Blake. I was a federal investigator working undercover at your father's company. I witnessed Henry Whitman murder your father, but I couldn't prove it. They were going to kill me too, so I had to disappear. I took the identity of your father's sister and stayed to take care of you after your mother died. Grace stared at the woman who had raised her, trying to process what she was hearing. You're not my real aunt. No, sweetheart. But I love you like you were my own daughter. I gave up everything. My career, my identity, my entire life, to protect you. Grace stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The Chicago skyline stretched out before her, familiar and comforting. But now everything felt different. Her entire life had been built on a lie. So when I saved Jason Whitman's life, she began slowly. You saved the son of the man who murdered your father. The irony was almost too much to bear. Grace had risked everything to save someone whose father had destroyed her family. But even as the revelation sank in, she found herself thinking about Jason's kind eyes, his genuine concern for her mother's illness. The way he'd treated her with respect when most wealthy people looked right through her. He doesn't know, does he? Grace asked. About what his father did. I don't think so. From what I've seen on the news, Jason seems different from Henry. But Grace, you can't take this job. It's too dangerous. If anyone connected to the Whitman organization realizes who you really are, they won't, Grace said firmly. Because Grace Sullivan is who I really am. You raised me. You loved me. You sacrificed everything for me. That makes you my real family, no matter what your name is. Diane started crying harder. I'm so sorry, Grace. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid. Don't apologize. Grace sat back down and took her mother's hands. You protected me. You gave me a life, a chance to grow up safe and loved. I could never be angry about that. But what about the job? Grace was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Jason's offer, about the money that could change their lives, about the man who seemed so different from the monster his father had been. I'm going to take it. Grace? No. Listen to me, Grace said, her voice growing stronger. Jason Whitman is not his father. I've seen him. Talked to him. He's a good person who's been betrayed by everyone around him. And maybe this is how we finally get justice for Dad. What do you mean? If I'm close to Jason, if I earn his trust, maybe I can find evidence of what his father did. Maybe we can finally prove that David Sullivan was murdered. Diane shook her head. It's been 15 years, Grace. Any evidence is long gone. Maybe. Or maybe it's all still there, hidden in family records or business files. You said Henry Whitman was careful, methodical. Men like that keep records of everything. And what if Jason isn't as innocent as you think? What if he knows exactly what his father did and he's just as corrupt? Grace thought about this possibility, but her instincts rebelled against it. Then I'll find that out too. But I don't think that's who he is. Diane studied her daughter's face, seeing something there that both worried and impressed her. You care about him. It wasn't a question, and Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. I barely know him, but you care about him. Grace couldn't deny it. In their brief interactions, she'd felt a connection to Jason that she couldn't explain. Maybe it was just sympathy for someone who'd been betrayed so completely. Or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, the thought of him being alone and vulnerable in a world full of people who wanted to use him made her heart ache. He needs someone he can trust, Grace said finally. Someone who isn't trying to get something from him. And you think you can be that person while investigating his family. I think I have to try. For Dad. For justice. And maybe for Jason too. Diane was quiet for a long time, studying Grace's face. Finally, she sighed. You're going to do this no matter what I say, aren't you? I am. Then promise me something. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't let yourself get so close to him that you forget what his family did to ours. Grace nodded, though even as she made the promise, she wondered if it was one she'd be able to keep. Every instinct told her that Jason Whitman was nothing like his father, that he was a victim of Henry's legacy as much as she was. But she also knew that falling for the son of her father's killer would be the ultimate betrayal of everything Caroline Blake had sacrificed to protect her. As she signed the contract that would change her life forever, Grace tried to convince herself that she could keep her heart separate from her mission, that she could get close enough to Jason to uncover the truth without losing herself in the process. She had no idea how wrong she was. The Cook County Jail was a fortress of concrete and steel that seemed to swallow hope itself. In a sterile visiting room, Brittany Hall sat across from her father, Charles Hall, separated by bulletproof glass and connected only by a scratchy telephone line. Her designer clothes had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, but her calculating eyes remained as sharp as ever. Daddy, you have to get me out of here, Brittany whispered into the phone, glancing nervously at the guard stationed near the door. This place is a nightmare, and Brian is starting to panic. He's talking about making a deal with the prosecutors. Charles Hall was a man who had spent 30 years in Chicago politics, climbing from city councilman to state senator through a combination of charm, ruthlessness, and carefully hidden corruption. At 62, He still cut an imposing figure, silver-haired, expensively dressed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. But today, there was something different in his steel-gray eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "Brian won't talk," Charles said with more confidence than he felt. "He's in too deep to start pointing fingers now. You don't understand, Daddy. The FBI is building a case. They have financial records, text messages, everything. And if they start digging deeper into our family's business..." Brittany let the threat hang in the air. Charles leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the Whitman family has been very profitable for us over the years. But if Jason starts cooperating with federal investigators, if he gives them access to his father's old files, they might find things that could be problematic for your political career." Charles's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what his daughter was referring to. The arrangement he'd had with Henry Whitman had been lucrative for both of them. Charles provided political protection and insider information, while Henry laundered money through various shell companies and paid generous bribes disguised as campaign contributions. But Henry Whitman had been a meticulous record keeper, and Charles had always suspected that the man kept detailed files on everyone he did business with, insurance policies. Henry had called them protection against anyone who might try to betray him. "The old man is dead," Charles said finally. "Whatever records he kept died with him. Are you sure about that? Because from what I understand, Jason has been going through his father's estate very thoroughly. What if he finds something?" In the adjoining visiting booth, Brian Aguirre was having a similar conversation with his own contact. The man across from him was younger than Charles Hall, maybe 45, with the kind of nondescript appearance that made him forgettable in a crowd. His name was Vincent Torres, and he worked for people who preferred to remain anonymous. "The situation has become complicated," Vincent said, his voice flat and emotionless. "My employers are concerned about potential exposure." Brian's hands were shaking as he gripped the phone. It was supposed to be clean. Jason was supposed to die of a heart attack, and everything would have been over. Nobody was supposed to investigate. But someone did investigate? That waitress identified the poison, the police got involved, and now there are federal agents crawling all over the Whitman family finances? What do you want me to do? "I'm in jail," Vincent smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "We want you to remember that you have friends on the outside, friends who can make your time here very difficult if you decide to cooperate with the authorities. I'm not going to talk." "Good, because if you do, if you even think about making a deal, we'll make sure that both you and your pretty girlfriend meet with unfortunate accidents." "Prison can be a very dangerous place." Brian nodded frantically. "I understand. But what about Jason? What if he finds something in his father's files?" "That's being taken care of." 3 hours later, Charles Hall walked out of the jail and into the Chicago afternoon, his mind racing with possibilities. He'd built his political career on knowing where all the bodies were buried, on having leverage over the right people at the right times. But the Whitman situation was spiraling out of control, and desperate times called for desperate measures. He made a phone call from his car, speaking in the kind of coded language that had served him well over the years. "It's Charles, we need to meet tonight." The voice on the other end was familiar. Vincent Torres, the man he'd been doing business with for the past 5 years. Vincent represented a consortium of interests that valued discretion and had no qualms about using violence to protect their investments. "The usual place." "Yes, and Vincent, we have a problem that needs to be solved quickly." That evening, Charles met Vincent at a warehouse on the south side of Chicago, the kind of place where conversations could be held without fear of surveillance. The building was officially owned by a shell company that existed only on paper, and it had been swept for bugs just that morning. "The Whitman situation is getting out of hand," Charles said without preamble. "Jason is asking too many questions, and there's a chance he might find records that could implicate all of us." Vincent lit a cigarette and leaned against a stack of shipping crates. "What kind of records?" Henry kept files on everyone he did business with. Financial records, correspondence, evidence of bribery and money laundering going back 20 years. If those files surface, "They won't," Vincent said with certainty. "We've been monitoring the situation. Jason Whitman is grieving and confused, but he's not investigating his father's business practices. He's more concerned with rebuilding his personal life. What about the girl, the waitress who saved his life? Grace Sullivan. She's clean. No criminal record, no connections to law enforcement, just a working-class girl trying to pay her mother's medical bills. Charles frowned. Something about this bothers me. A waitress just happens to recognize poison. Just happens to be in the right place at the right time. Sometimes coincidences are just coincidences. In my experience, there's no such thing as coincidence when this much money is involved. Vincent stubbed out his cigarette. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need insurance. If Brittany and Brian go down for attempted murder, they might try to drag me down with them. If Jason finds his father's files, he might turn them over to the FBI. If this Grace Sullivan is more than she appears to be, you want them eliminated? I want the situation contained. Permanently. Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. That's a lot of bodies, Charles. A lot of attention. Not all at once. Make it look accidental. A gas leak in the jail. Maybe a car accident for the girl and her mother. As for Jason, Charles smiled coldly. Maybe his grief finally becomes too much to bear. Suicide runs in families sometimes. It'll be expensive. I didn't get where I am by being cheap. Vincent nodded slowly. I'll need some time to plan this properly. These kinds of operations require finesse. How much time? A week. Maybe 2. We need to be smart about this. As Charles drove home through the dark Chicago streets, he felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. He'd spent 3 decades cleaning up problems for powerful people, and he'd learned that the key to survival was eliminating threats before they became unmanageable. Henry Whitman had understood that principle. The old man had been ruthless when necessary. Whether it was silencing a business partner who knew too much or eliminating a federal investigator who was getting too close to the truth, Charles had helped with both of those situations, providing political cover and making sure the investigations were quietly closed. David Sullivan's death had been ruled an accident, and Caroline Blake's disappearance had been written off as a federal agent who'd cracked under pressure and gone into hiding. But now Henry was dead. His empire was vulnerable, and too many people knew too much. It was time to tie up loose ends. Once and for all, Charles had no idea that the federal investigator he thought was dead was living under his nose, or that the waitress he was planning to kill was the daughter of the man whose murder he'd helped cover up 15 years earlier. If he had known, he might have realized that some secrets have a way of coming back to haunt the people who try to bury them. Grace had been working as Jason's security consultant for 3 weeks when the call came. She was in his downtown office, reviewing the guest list for an upcoming charity gala, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Grace Sullivan. The voice was electronically distorted, robotic and threatening. Who is this? Someone who has something that belongs to you. Grace's blood went cold. What are you talking about? Check your phone. A video message appeared on her screen, and Grace's world collapsed. The footage showed her mother, Caroline, tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Diane's face was pale and drawn, her eyes wide with terror, but she was alive. "Mom," Grace whispered, her hands shaking as she gripped the phone. "She's safe for now," the distorted voice continued. "But that can change very quickly if you don't do exactly what we tell you." Jason looked up from his desk, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Grace, what is it?" Grace held up a hand, trying to focus on the caller's instructions while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Here's what's going to happen," the voice said. "Tonight, when Jason Whitman leaves the office, you're going to stay behind. You're going to access his private safe and retrieve a specific set of documents. I don't know the combination to any safe. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out. We need the files labeled Sullivan Mining Company and anything related to Blake Industries." Grace felt the world tilt around her. Sullivan Mining Company, her father's business, Blake Industries, a name that must be connected to Caroline's past. Somehow, these people knew exactly who she was. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You just need to deliver those files to the address we're going to send you. Do that, and your mother comes home safely. Refuse, or try to involve the police, and she dies." The line went dead. Grace stared at her phone, watching the video of her terrified mother loop endlessly. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. "Grace! What's happening?" Jason was standing now, moving around his desk toward her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Grace's voice caught in her throat. How could she explain this without revealing everything? Someone I care about is in trouble. What kind of trouble? Grace looked at Jason's concerned face. At this man she'd come to trust and care about more than she'd ever intended. The man whose father had murdered her father. The man whose family files might contain the evidence she needed to finally get justice. And now she was being asked to steal from him. "They want me to take something from you," she said quietly. Jason's expression grew serious. "Who's they?" "I don't know. They have my mother." Grace showed him the video, watching his face as he processed what he was seeing. To her surprise, there was no suspicion in his eyes, no doubt about her loyalty, just immediate concern for her safety. "We need to call the police," he said. "No," Grace grabbed his arm. "They said they'd kill her if I involved anyone else." "Grace, these are professionals. You can't handle this alone." "I have to. I can't lose her, Jason. She's all I have." Jason studied her face, seeing the desperation there, the fear that was consuming her from the inside out. "What do they want you to steal?" Grace hesitated, then decided that partial truth was better than an outright lie. "Files, business records from your father's company." "Which files?" "Sullivan Mining Company, and something called Blake Industries." Jason's face went pale. "I know those names." "You do. My father had a business partner named David Sullivan. They owned a mining company together until Sullivan died in a car accident. As for Blake Industries," Jason frowned, clearly searching his memory. "I think that was connected to some kind of federal investigation years ago." Grace felt sick. Jason knew about her father, knew about Caroline's cover company. But did he know the truth about what had really happened? "Jason, if I don't get those files, then we'll get them together." Grace stared at him. "What? You heard me. If that's what it takes to save your mother, then we'll find those files. But I'm not letting you walk into this alone. You don't understand. These people are dangerous. They've already tried to kill you once. Which is exactly why I'm not letting them hurt someone I care about." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to address. Grace felt tears burning her eyes. Tears of gratitude, fear, and a growing emotional connection that was becoming impossible to ignore. "The safe is in my father's old office," Jason said, already moving toward the door. "I haven't been in there since he died, but I know the combination." They took the elevator to the 42nd floor, where Henry Whitman's executive suite had remained untouched for the past year. Jason used his keycard to open the heavy oak doors, and they stepped into a room that felt like a shrine to power and wealth. The office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago. Henry's desk was still exactly as he'd left it, with family photos and expensive paperweights arranged with military precision. Behind the desk, an oil painting of Henry himself stared down at them with cold, calculating eyes. Grace shivered as she looked at the portrait. This was the man who had murdered her father, the monster whose actions had shaped her entire life. Being in his space felt like walking through a graveyard. "The safe is behind that painting," Jason said, pointing to his father's portrait. As Jason moved the painting aside to reveal a digital safe, Grace's phone buzzed with a text message containing an address and a time, midnight. "I have 4 hours," she said. Jason punched in a series of numbers, and the safe opened with a quiet click. Inside were dozens of file folders, legal documents, and several external hard drives. Jason began pulling out files, scanning the labels until he found what they were looking for. "Here," he said, handing Grace a thick folder labeled Sullivan Mining Company. "And this one," he passed her another file marked Blake Industries, Federal Investigation. Grace's hands trembled as she took the folders. Somewhere in these documents might be the evidence that could finally bring her father's killer to justice. But right now, all that mattered was saving Caroline. "Grace," Jason said softly, "there's something you should know about these files." "What?" "My father kept detailed records of everything. Every business deal, every conversation, every transaction. If there's something in here that could hurt someone, something that people might kill to keep secret, what are you saying?" "I'm saying these kidnappings might be about more than just random extortion. Someone very powerful wants these files to disappear." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think the same people who tried to kill you? I think this is all connected. Brian and Brittany, the poisoning attempt, Your mother's kidnapping. Someone is trying to bury the past, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process. Jason's phone rang, making them both jump. He answered it cautiously. Jason Whitman. Mr. Whitman. This is Detective Rodriguez. We need to talk to you immediately. There's been a development in your case. What kind of development? Brian Aguirre and Brittany Hall escaped from county jail 3 hours ago. We believe they had inside help, and we have reason to think they might be planning another attempt on your life. Jason looked at Grace, seeing the terror in her eyes as she realized what this meant. Detective, I think they might have already made their move. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the Whitman building within 20 minutes, accompanied by Detective Chen and 2 federal agents who introduced themselves as Martinez and Foster. Grace sat in Jason's office, clutching the stolen files while her mind raced with possibilities. None of them good. We need to know everything, Detective Rodriguez said, settling into a chair across from Grace. The escape was too well coordinated to be spontaneous. Someone with serious resources helped Brittany and Brian get out. Grace showed them the video of her mother, her voice steady despite the terror eating at her from the inside. They want these files in exchange for her life. Agent Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, examined the folders. Sullivan Mining Company and Blake Industries. Those names came up in our investigation 15 years ago. What investigation? Jason asked. Money laundering operation involving several prominent Chicago businessmen. The case went cold when our undercover agent disappeared and the primary witness died in a car accident. Grace felt her heart stop. The undercover agent? What was her name? That information is classified, Agent Foster said automatically. Her name was Caroline Blake, Grace said quietly. The room went silent. Agent Martinez leaned forward, studying Grace's face with new intensity. How do you know that name? Grace looked at Jason, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. He was too smart not to put the pieces together. A missing federal agent named Blake. Files about Blake Industries. Grace's desperate need to save her mother. Because Caroline Blake is my mother, Grace said. She's been living as Diane Sullivan for the past 15 years. Jesus Christ, Detective Chen muttered. Agent Martinez was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone at the bureau. When she hung up, her expression was grim. If Caroline Blake is alive, if she's been in hiding all this time, then she's the only person who can testify about what really happened 15 years ago. What did happen? Jason asked, though Grace could see in his eyes that he was starting to suspect the truth. Agent Foster opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick file. David Sullivan and Henry Whitman were business partners until Sullivan discovered that Whitman was using their mining company to launder money for drug cartels. Sullivan contacted the FBI, and we sent Agent Blake undercover to gather evidence. And then my father died in a car accident, Grace said bitterly. It wasn't an accident, Agent Martinez said. Agent Blake witnessed the murder, but by the time backup arrived, Whitman's people had staged the scene. Blake barely escaped with her life. Jason had gone very still. You're saying my father murdered David Sullivan? We could never prove it. Blake went into hiding, and without her testimony, we had no case. But now they have her, Grace said, and they're going to kill her unless I hand over these files, which contain evidence that could destroy multiple careers and put a lot of powerful people in prison, Agent Foster added. Jason stood up abruptly and walked to the window. Staring out at the Chicago skyline, Grace could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Jason, she said softly. He turned around, and the pain in his eyes made her heart ache. My whole life has been built on blood money. Everything I inherited. Everything I thought my father worked for. It's all tainted. You didn't know, Grace said. Didn't I? How many times did I ignore the whispers? The rumors about where our wealth really came from? How many times did I choose not to ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers? Agent Martinez interrupted. Right now, we need to focus on getting Agent Blake back safely and apprehending the people responsible for this. We can set up surveillance at the exchange point, Detective Rodriguez suggested. Catch them when they try to take the files. No, Grace said immediately. They'll kill her the moment they see law enforcement. These people escaped from federal custody. They have resources and connections you can't match. So what do you suggest? Agent Foster asked. Grace looked at Jason, seeing the same determination in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. We give them what they want, but we make sure they don't get away with it. Absolutely not, Detective Rodriguez said. You're not trained for this kind of operation. I'm trained enough, Grace said. I've been watching my mother take medications for years. I know how to recognize poisons. I've been working security for Jason. I know how to spot threats. And I'm the only one they won't suspect of being law enforcement. Jason moved back to his desk and pulled out a legal pad. Here's what we're going to do. For the next 2 hours, they planned an operation that was part rescue mission, part sting operation. Jason would use his connections to trace the warehouse where Caroline was being held. Grace would go to the exchange point as planned, but with backup hidden nearby. Most importantly, they would copy all the files before handing them over, ensuring that the evidence would survive even if the kidnappers escaped. There's one more thing, Agent Martinez said as they prepared to leave. If these files contain what we think they do, this case is going to explode. We're talking about corruption involving politicians, judges, police officials, people who've been protected for years. Good, Jason said grimly. It's time the truth came out. As night fell over Chicago, Grace found herself alone with Jason in his office while the law enforcement team prepared their surveillance equipment. The files had been copied and uploaded to secure servers, ensuring that Caroline's sacrifice and David's death wouldn't be in vain. I need to tell you something, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. I already know, Jason replied. You're David Sullivan's daughter. Grace nodded, tears burning her eyes. I found out the truth 3 weeks ago. The day I took this job, I was going to use my position to investigate your father, to find evidence of what he did. And instead, you ended up saving my life. I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to... Grace's voice broke. To what? To fall in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything they'd been through together. Jason moved closer, reaching out to touch her face gently. I love you too, he said, which is why I'm not letting you face this alone. Jason, if something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. We're going to get your mother back. We're going to put the people responsible for this behind bars, and then we're going to figure out how to build a life together despite everything our families have been through. Grace leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. How can you be so sure? Because I've learned something important these past few weeks. Love doesn't care about the past. It doesn't care about family names or old grudges or sins committed by people who are already dead. Love cares about who you choose to be right now, in this moment. And who are you choosing to be? Someone who stands up for what's right, someone who protects the people he cares about, someone who makes sure that the truth finally comes to light, no matter what it costs. Grace's phone buzzed with a text message. Time to go. Come alone, or she dies. Jason kissed her forehead gently. Are you ready? Grace picked up the files that contained 15 years of hidden secrets. Evidence of murder and corruption that had shaped both their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. I'm ready. As they prepared to leave for what could be the most dangerous night of their lives, neither of them knew that Caroline Blake was sitting in that warehouse, planning her own escape. After 15 years of hiding, she was finally ready to fight back. The warehouse district on Chicago's South Side was a maze of abandoned buildings and empty lots, the kind of place where screams would go unheard and bodies could disappear without a trace. Grace drove through the industrial wasteland with the copied files beside her, her heart pounding as she approached the address the kidnappers had given her. 3 blocks away, Jason sat in an unmarked van with agents Martinez and Foster, watching Grace's location on a GPS tracker they'd hidden in her car. Detective Rodriguez and her team were positioned at strategic points around the warehouse, invisible in the darkness but ready to move at a moment's notice. Remember, Agent Martinez said into her radio, nobody moves until we have confirmation that Caroline Blake is safe. These people have already killed once, and they won't hesitate to do it again. Grace pulled into the empty parking lot of a massive warehouse that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Broken windows stared down at her like dead eyes, and graffiti covered the lower walls in layers of urban decay. She grabbed the files and stepped out of her car, every nerve in her body screaming danger. A figure emerged from the shadows, Brian Aguirre, looking nothing like the polished lawyer she'd served at Crystal Palace. His expensive suit had been replaced by dark clothing, and there was something wild in his eyes. The desperation of a man who knew he was running out of options. "You came alone," he said, scanning the empty lot. "Smart girl." "Where is she?" Grace demanded. "Inside, but first, let me see the files." Grace held up the folders. "First, I see my mother." Brian smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're not really in a position to make demands, are you? I'm in a position to walk away and let your entire conspiracy collapse. Those files contain evidence that goes back 20 years, evidence that could destroy dozens of careers and put a lot of powerful people in prison for life, which is exactly why we need them. Show me my mother, or I burn them right here in the parking lot." Brian studied her face, seeing the determination there. "Fine, but try anything stupid, and she dies." He led Grace through a side entrance into the warehouse. The interior was vast and dark, filled with the smell of rust and decay. Industrial equipment sat covered in dust and shadows, creating a maze of hiding places and blind corners. In the center of the space, illuminated by a few bare light bulbs, Caroline Blake sat tied to a chair. She looked older than Grace remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were alert and focused. When she saw Grace, relief and terror warred across her features. "Grace, don't," Caroline started to say, but Brittany Hall stepped out of the shadows and backhanded her across the face. "Shut up," Brittany snarled. She looked different too. Her perfect socialite facade had cracked, revealing something cold and vicious underneath. "You've caused us enough trouble already. Let her go," Grace said, stepping forward. "I brought what you wanted. Did you really think it would be that simple?" A new voice asked from the darkness. Charles Hall emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers, and Grace felt a chill run down her spine. She'd seen him on the news, knew he was a powerful politician. But seeing him here, personally involved in kidnapping and extortion, drove home just how deep this conspiracy went. "Senator Hall," Grace said, "I should have known you'd be behind this. You should have minded your own business, Ms. Sullivan. Or should I say, Ms. Sullivan? Blake. We know who you really are." "Dear, we know that your mother is actually Caroline Blake, the federal agent who's been hiding from justice for 15 years. Hiding from justice. She was the victim. She was a corrupt federal agent who tried to destroy legitimate businessmen with fabricated evidence." Charles interrupted. "Henry Whitman was a pillar of the community, and your so-called mother tried to frame him for murder." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "You actually believe that? Or are you just that good at lying to yourself?" Charles's expression darkened. "Give me the files. Not until you let her go. I don't think you understand the situation you're in." Charles nodded to someone Grace couldn't see, and suddenly the warehouse was filled with armed men. At least 6 figures stepped out of the shadows, all pointing weapons at Grace and Caroline. "You see," Charles continued, "we're not just going to take those files and disappear. We're going to eliminate every trace of this investigation, including the 2 people who could testify about what really happened 15 years ago." Grace felt her blood turn to ice. "You're going to kill us anyway. I'm going to tie up loose ends. Your deaths will be tragic, of course. A daughter and her sick mother, victims of a random warehouse robbery gone wrong. Very sad. The FBI knows I'm here," Grace said desperately. "No, they don't. We've been monitoring law enforcement communications all evening. You came alone, just like we asked." But Charles was wrong. At that moment, Agent Martinez was coordinating with her team, preparing to move in despite the risk to the hostages. Through their surveillance equipment, they could hear everything happening inside the warehouse. "We have multiple armed suspects," Martinez whispered into her radio. "I count at least 6 shooters, plus the 3 principals, Caroline Blake and Grace Sullivan, are in immediate danger." "Orders," Detective Rodriguez asked from her position near the warehouse's north entrance. "We move in 90 seconds, Rodriguez. Take your team through the north entrance, Chen. You're with me through the south, Foster. Coordinate with the Chicago SWAT team. I want this place surrounded." Inside the warehouse, Grace was running out of time and options. She could see Caroline trying to work her hands free from the ropes binding her to the chair. But the older woman was weak and the knots were tight. "You know what I don't understand," Grace said, trying to buy time. "Why Brian and Brittany tried to kill Jason in the first place. He didn't know anything about his father's crimes." Brian laughed bitterly. because we needed Jason's money to pay off debts we owed to some very unforgiving people. But then we realized that if we controlled his estate, we could also control his father's files, destroy the evidence, protect our friends. Everyone wins. Everyone except the people you murder. Casualties of war, Brittany said with a shrug. Besides, Jason was never going to marry me for love. At least this way, his death would serve a purpose. You're both insane. We're practical, Charles corrected. But this conversation is over, Vincent. One of the armed men stepped forward. The same Vincent Torres who had met with Charles earlier. He raised his weapon toward Grace and she closed her eyes. Thinking of Jason and hoping he would somehow find a way to move on without her. That's when all hell broke loose. The warehouse exploded in a chaos of shouting voices, flashlight beams, and gunfire. FBI agents and Chicago police poured through every entrance simultaneously, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness like laser beams. FBI, everyone on the ground! Grace threw herself sideways, rolling behind a piece of machinery as bullets whined over her head. Through the chaos, she could see Caroline struggling with her bonds, finally managing to free one hand. Charles Hall was screaming orders at his men, but the element of surprise was gone. 3 of the gunmen went down in the first exchange of fire, while the others scrambled for cover behind shipping containers and industrial equipment. Brian made a run for a side exit, but Detective Chen was waiting for him. He went down hard, screaming as Chen's taser dropped him to the concrete floor. Brittany tried to use Caroline as a human shield, pressing a gun to the older woman's head. But Caroline had 15 years of suppressed anger to draw on. She drove her elbow back into Brittany's ribs, twisted free, and knocked the gun out of her hands with a move that showed her federal training was still sharp. "That's for David Sullivan," Caroline gasped as Brittany collapsed. Vincent Torres was still firing, pinned down behind a forklift but refusing to surrender. Agent Martinez and 2 other agents were closing in on his position. When Charles Hall made his final, desperate play, he grabbed the files that Grace had dropped when the shooting started and pulled out a lighter. "Stay back," he shouted. "I'll burn them all." But Grace was already moving. She tackled Charles from behind, sending both of them crashing to the ground. The files scattered across the concrete as they fought for control of the lighter. "You destroyed my family!" Grace screamed, her hands around Charles's throat. "You killed my father!" Charles tried to throw her off, but Grace held on with the strength that came from 15 years of suppressed rage. It took 2 FBI agents to pull her away from the politician who had orchestrated so much suffering. When the smoke cleared, all the conspirators were in custody. Charles Hall sat in handcuffs, his political career over and his future measured in decades behind bars. Brian and Brittany were both wounded but alive, facing charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. Vincent Torres and his surviving men were being read their rights. And for the first time in 15 years, Caroline Blake was free to tell the truth about what had really happened to David Sullivan. Grace found her mother sitting on the back of an ambulance, being checked by paramedics. Caroline looked up as Grace approached, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. The federal agent and the daughter she'd raised, both forever changed by this night. "Is it over?" Caroline asked. Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It's over, Mom, finally." 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Chicago Federal Courthouse, as Grace Sullivan Whitman adjusted her new law degree diploma on the wall of her small office. At 30, she had just graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern Law School, fulfilling a dream that had been born in the ashes of tragedy and nurtured by an unexpected love story. Outside her window, the city bustled with its usual energy, but Grace could see the changes that had rippled outward from that night in the warehouse. The corruption scandal that emerged from Charles Hall's files had been dubbed Chicago's Watergate by the media, resulting in the arrests of 43 politicians, judges, and business leaders. It was the largest political corruption case in Illinois history. "Mrs. Whitman," her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Grace smiled at the name. Even after 6 months of marriage, hearing herself called Mrs. Whitman still felt surreal. She and Jason had married in a small ceremony at Grant Park, with Caroline, now fully recovered and using her real name again, officiating as a minister for a day through an online ordination. "Send them in," Grace said. The door opened to admit Maria Santos, a young woman whose husband had been killed by corrupt police officers 3 years earlier. She was Grace's first client at the new law firm she'd established with Jason's help, a practice dedicated to helping families who had been victimized by corruption and violence. "How did the deposition go?" Grace asked as Maria sat down. "Better than I expected," Maria replied, her eyes bright with something that hadn't been there when she'd first walked into Grace's office. "Hope. Your questions really made them uncomfortable. I think they're going to settle," Grace nodded, making notes in the file. This was why she'd chosen law, why she'd worked 18-hour days for 3 years to get her degree while helping Jason rebuild his life and supporting Caroline through her recovery. Every victory for clients like Maria felt like another step toward balancing the scales of justice. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Jason appeared in the doorway, looking every inch the successful businessman, but with a warmth in his eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom and genuine happiness. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I wanted to remind you about lunch." Grace checked her watch. 12:30. Where had the morning gone? "Give me 5 minutes to finish up with Maria," she said. After Maria left with a settlement offer that would change her family's life, Grace found herself alone with Jason in her office. He moved behind her desk and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "How's your first week as a lawyer treating you?" he asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Exhausting, exhilarating, terrifying." Grace leaned into his embrace. "Perfect. Any regrets about turning down that offer from the big firm downtown?" Grace had indeed received several lucrative offers from prestigious Chicago law firms, but she'd chosen to start her own practice instead. The Whitman Foundation provided the funding, and Grace provided the passion for helping people who had nowhere else to turn. "None," she said firmly. "This is what I'm meant to do." They walked hand in hand to their favorite cafe near the courthouse, the same place where Jason had proposed 6 months earlier. It was a small, unremarkable spot that served excellent coffee and minded its own business. Exactly what 2 people who'd lived through a media circus needed. Caroline was waiting for them at their usual table, looking healthier and more vibrant than Grace had seen her in years. The neurological condition that had been slowly killing her had turned out to be stress-induced, exacerbated by 15 years of living in fear. With the truth finally out and her name cleared, Caroline's health had improved dramatically. "How's the book coming?" Jason asked as they sat down. Caroline's memoir, 15 Years in the Shadows, a federal agent's story, was being published by one of the major houses in New York. The advance alone had been enough to ensure that she and Grace would never have to worry about money again. But more importantly, it would tell the story of David Sullivan's murder and the conspiracy that had covered it up. "The editor wants me to add more details about the emotional toll," Caroline said. "How it felt to lie to Grace all those years, to watch her grow up while carrying this secret." "Are you okay with that?" Grace asked. "I think so. If our story can help other families going through similar situations, then it's worth the discomfort." Their lunch was interrupted by Jason's phone ringing. He glanced at the caller ID, and his expression grew serious. "It's Agent Martinez," he said, answering the call. "Hello, Agent Martinez. What? Are you sure? We'll be right there." Grace felt her stomach clench. Even 2 years later, unexpected calls from the FBI made her nervous. "What is it?" she asked as Jason hung up. "Charles Hall died in prison this morning. Heart attack." The news hit Grace like a physical blow. Charles Hall had been serving a life sentence without parole, and while she'd never wished death on him, his passing felt like the closing of a chapter. She wasn't sure she was ready to finish. "How do you feel about that?" Caroline asked gently. Grace thought about it for a moment. "Sad, I think. Not because he's dead, but because he never had to face the full consequences of what he did. He never had to apologize to the families he destroyed or explain why he thought money was worth more than human lives. Some people are incapable of that kind of accountability," Jason said. "But his death doesn't change what we've accomplished. The system that protected him has been dismantled. The families he hurt have gotten justice. The next Charles Hall won't find it so easy to hide." That evening, Grace and Jason sat on the terrace of their downtown apartment, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan. The apartment was a compromise between Grace's practical nature and Jason's comfortable lifestyle. Elegant, but not ostentatious. Expensive, but not showy. Jason had indeed given up most of his inherited wealth, keeping only what had been legitimately earned and donating the rest to various charities. The Whitman Foundation, which they ran together, had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the Midwest, focusing on victims' rights and criminal justice reform. "I got a call from Northwestern today," Grace said, curling up against Jason's side. "They want me to teach a course on victims' rights law." "Professor Whitman?" Jason mused. "I like the sound of that." "Part-time," Grace clarified. "I don't want to give up the practice." "Of course not, but sharing what you've learned, inspiring the next generation of lawyers to fight for justice, Dad would have been proud." Grace looked at him with surprise. Jason rarely mentioned David Sullivan directly, though he'd donated a significant sum to establish the David Sullivan Memorial Scholarship for students from working-class families pursuing law degrees. "You think about him sometimes," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think about the man my father should have been, the businessman David was. Honest, hard-working, committed to doing the right thing even when it cost him everything." Jason's voice was quiet. "I try to honor that legacy, even though I have no right to it." "You have every right," Grace said firmly. "Dad would have liked you. He would have been proud that his daughter married someone with your integrity." As night fell over Chicago, they talked about their plans for the future. Grace's law practice was growing rapidly, and Jason was considering running for city council on a reform platform. Caroline was planning a speaking tour to promote her book and advocate for federal agents working dangerous undercover assignments. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't spilled that drink?" Grace asked. "Every day," Jason admitted. "But then I remember that love doesn't depend on circumstance. Somehow, some way, I think we would have found each other, even with everything our families went through. Especially because of what our families went through. We understand the importance of truth, of justice, of protecting the people we love. That's not a bad foundation for a marriage." Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that terrifying night at Crystal Palace to this moment of peace and contentment. She thought about her father, who had died trying to do the right thing, and her mother, who had sacrificed 15 years of her life to protect a daughter who wasn't even her own. She thought about Jason, who had given up everything to build something better. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too." As they sat together under the stars, Grace realized that their story was both an ending and a beginning. An ending to 15 years of lies and fear and hidden truths, but also a beginning of a marriage built on honesty, of careers dedicated to justice, of a future where love really could triumph over the darkest secrets of the past. The next morning, Grace would return to her law office to fight for another family destroyed by corruption. Jason would continue his work with the foundation, helping victims rebuild their lives. Caroline would keep writing, keep speaking, keep ensuring that David Sullivan's death had meaning. But tonight, they were simply a family that had found each other against impossible odds, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories are born from the deepest tragedies.